Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. Time for the match preview with me, Andrew Musgrove, and John Gibson. Newcastle head to the City Ground on Sunday to face Nottingham Forest. If I'd said to you, Nottingham Forest would be third in the league come this game, I'm sure you would have laughed me out the room. But that is where they find themselves, third in the Premier League table, while Newcastle lie 11th. But there's only 4 points separating the two teams. It is very tight there outside the top two. So plenty up for grabs. John, I think the neutral are potentially going to have a very exciting game to watch from a Newcastle United point of view. Maybe a little bit fear in the form of Chris Wood, and now I look that he will end up grabbing another hat-trick. Maybe looking at the battle on the flanks and wondering if Tino, Livramento and Lewis Hall can continue their great form of late. That's all to come in the show. First things first, how are you doing? Are you well?
I'm good. And I'm particularly good after the last two games. Beating Chelsea to keep us going in the League Cup and a fabulous win against Arsenal. It's a bit like normal service being resumed, isn't it?
It is. But as I said on the Monday show, and as I said after the game against Chelsea, I'm not going to let myself get too excited because I want to see Newcastle United build on it. We've got to be better than just two games. Eddie Howe said similar after the game against Arsenal. I suspect you're of the same mind frame as well. You've got
Absolutely.
to
I
keep
mean,
winning
if you
games.
remember when we previewed Arsenal, I was saying, it's no good sort of being on the pogo stick, up, down, and being fabulous because we got through against Chelsea. Then we face reality against Arsenal. It's only by building on something that, it becomes concrete and it becomes something to crow about because another setback, for example, two terrific results, but go and get beaten at Nottingham Forest, and you've got a fortnight to stew over it. So it is essential to keep going, and that's what I'm looking for Newcastle to do.
It's funny, isn't it? Because when we were talking about Arsenal and the build up to that game, we were talking about the players they've got. They're going for the title. We've got to be respectful. We've got to be wary. But actually, in hindsight, because we weren't actually talking or looking ahead to the Forest game, because we're always looking ahead to the next game,
Yeah,
if you'd actually talked about which team was carrying more of a threat to Newcastle United in terms of form, you probably would have said Nottingham Forest ahead of Arsenal because Arsenal at the moment aren't themselves, whereas Forest, even before they picked up their third consecutive win over the weekend, were in great form. They remain in great form, only lost once this season. Sunday is going to be such a bigger task simply because Forest are in great form and Newcastle United are going to have their work cut out.
yeah. I mean, it's startling to say that, and even hearing it now, I still find it a little bit eye-opening, and I'm certain Newcastle United fans will because I mean, are we dreaming, or was it only last year they were fighting off relegation and points deductions, and they were getting ridiculed in the same way as Chelsea were getting ridiculed for buying en masse and hoping a few of them come out and come off. And yet Chelsea have turned that into something of a plus, and so have Forest. And good for them. But Newcastle must remember their strengths and remember what we do well and remember our history. And while we've got to go down there with the absolute utmost respect for what Nottingham Forest have achieved this season, because if we haven't got that respect, we will come up short. But we mustn't go down there with any fear because they're still Nottingham Forest and they're still only 10 games into a new season, albeit they've had a wonderful, wonderful start. And I'm pretty sure they'll have surprised themselves and their own fans as well. But it's only the start, and we've got to get amongst them and not be overawed by the fact we're playing the team third top because they were work in progress, Nottingham Forest. They're not a top team. Not a top team yet. They were work in progress, and we must remember that.
Yeah, indeed. Are you concerned, though, that Newcastle United tend to raise their game when they face the likes of Arsenal, Man City, Chelsea? And it's games like this, as good as Forest have been this season, it's games like this where at the very least this should be matching them, that they just tend to fall short. You're thinking Everton, you're thinking Bournemouth potentially, and now I'm thinking Nottingham Forest. Do you think with the upturn in form from Newcastle the last few weeks where the performances have been brilliant and now we're starting to see the results match the performances, do you also think that mindset, that frailty of not being able to match lesser sides, for want of a better phrase, will have gone, and what we will see is them actually putting the same level of performance that we see against the top teams?
Well, if that's the case, and by the way, I totally follow that because the Newcastle United record proves that. The better, the bigger the team we play, the better the performance we put in. Um, but if that's the case, then forget we're playing Nottingham Forest, and remember we're playing the team third top of the league. And therefore it's a big game, and let's go out against the big teams and put a big performance in. Forget what they call the team, just remember where they're playing. And much more of a concern for me, Andrew, when I look at the Newcastle situation, is that when we have played well against these top teams, and remember that we've beaten Arsenal, we've beaten Spurs, we've taken 2 points off Man City, we've beaten Chelsea in the League Cup, all the good teams. But what's the common denominator? All those results come at home. And we've got to improve our away record. I was just looking it up. 2 years ago, when we got into the Champions League by finishing fourth, away from home, our record was won 8, drawn 8, lost 3. We only let 19 goals in 19 games. We had the third best away record in the whole of the country. Last season we lost 11 away, and we had the 11th best record. This season, and it's only 5 away games into the season, but it's 1-2-2 is our record, and we're 11th again. So if you think European sides, teams that qualify for Europe, Andrew, qualify because of their way form. Because if you're good enough to beat the top of the league, you win your majority of home games automatically because that's how you're up there. You're up there because you're good at home. The difference that sorts out the men from the boys is the away record. In Newcastle, even when they lift a game against the good sides, they lift a game against the good sides at St James's Park. Not away. Well, our away record this season and last season is poor. We've stood both times 11th in the table. 2 years ago, we were the third best away side in the country. We've got to get back to that away form, and there's no better place or better time to start doing that than this Sunday.
Yep, indeed, because you want to build on that momentum, but like you say as well, you want to continue the good performances away from home and turn them performances into victories. And totally agree with you. Newcastle United are going to get back into Europe. It is about improving their record on the road. Plenty of questions to have come out of that brilliant performance against Arsenal. And I mean, the key question is about the high intensity and the high press, and we saw it in stages against Arsenal. We also saw them drop back and absorb and then hit them on the counter, especially in the second half. I mean, first off, John, it was just a tremendous performance by Newcastle. Tactically, they were absolutely spot on. I've spoken to someone who covers Nottingham Forest and asked them, how do they set up at home? And they've got back in touch with me and said, I asked them whether it was going to be a sit back and invite teams on and then counter them, or whether it was going to be possession based. And they got back in touch and said it's somewhere in the middle. They have about 40% possession, second lowest in the league, but they will press when on top. They aren't defensive at home. I think the plan is to invite teams on to leave space behind for Alanga and Hudson Odoi. So my concern there is, if Newcastle United are forced to have a lot of the ball, I don't think that's their strong point. I think they prefer to either have to press teams or to sit back, absorb, and then hit them on the counter. When they've got to control the game, they're a little bit nervous. Maybe it's because in the back of their mind, they're thinking if we lose it here, then players are going to come down the flanks and really press us. I don't know. I mean, when you hear the Nottingham Forest chap there saying that, what comes into your mind?
Well, yes, I think it is a problem to decide the way we're going to play because to a great extent, we don't decide the way we're going to play, they do. Because if they decide to sit back and hit us on their counter, then we're going to have a lot of the ball and we're not at our best. And sometimes when we have a lot of the ball, Andrew, we'll play too slowly. and that plays into their hands because they can get well organised. I mean, they don't play as a defensive unit, the guy was saying, and I'm certain that he's absolutely 100% right. But they've only let in 7 goals conceded in all 10 of their games. They're good defensively. And what they're good at, I think, is the counter because they've only let 7 goals in. They're very compact at the back. They've got midfielders who can play. I'm thinking of Elliot Anderson and Gibbs White, so they can get the ball and control it. And they've got 2 quick wingers in Elanga, who we wanted, and Hudson Odoi, who have both got great pedigree, Andrew. I mean, Elanga was brought up Man United, and Hudson Odoi was brought up Chelsea and got England caps at Chelsea. Now they're quick, and they're quick on their counter, and they get them up the field quickly from a defensive position. And they feed the beast, if you like, the famous phrase, which is Chris Wood. And it's because they've got 2 wingers like that. So it's going to be interesting. I'm not certain it's going to be that much different in some ways than it was against Chelsea. Sorry, I do apologise, against Arsenal, which was, they wanted a lot of the ball. A lot of their quality work is done by good flankers, good wingers in Saka and Martinelli, who get up the field quick and create so much for them. But as you sort of touched on in the intro, um, our fullbacks were absolutely brilliant against them too, Livramento and Hall. And I was, as I said last week, I'm a big Livramento fan, but I was worried about him in this game because whether he switches off sometimes defensively, etc., etc. He did. I mean, Eddie got his team selection absolutely brilliantly. I've got to give him that. Every part of his team selection was justified. If we had lost to Arsenal, he would have had queries about dropping Tonali, and he would have been pilloried for dropping Tonali from the starting lineup by not perhaps playing Kraft, etc., etc. He got it absolutely spot on. So he went from being somebody who's going to be pilloried to a tactical genius, all because the result went right. And well done him, and he deserves 100% credit for that. And what we've got to look at is our 2 fullbacks doing exactly to Nottingham Forest what they did to Arsenal, because the threat is in front of them again. The threat is down both sides of the width of the pitch, because that's where Forest are at their best. And they've got to nullify those two. And I mean, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, what's happened to him? What a wonderful young man he's turned out to be, from being somebody that we were a tad concerned about early last season. He has been consistently wonderful. I mean, Livramento is wonderful, but is not consistent yet. This guy suddenly, I mean, Livramento last season was miles ahead of Hall, wasn't he, on ability and on getting selection at the start of games? Not now. I can't think of anybody outside of possibly Isaac and Gordon who's more automatically on the team sheet from the second the blank page is put in front of Howe is then Lewis Hall, because he has been terrific both defensively and offensively, and they are going to hold the key for Newcastle because the wingers are going to hold the key for Forest.
Totally agree with you. I think that's where the game is won and lost. It's down the flanks, because if Chris Wood's going to be scoring on Sunday, he's got 8 and 10. The service is what's key there. It's the crosses in the box from Alanga or from Hudson Odoi. And if Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall can keep those two quiet, and if we're talking ability on paper, Martinelli and Saka are better than Hudson Odoi and Alanga. And look what happened. Now, of course, we're not just talking on paper, we're talking about confidence and all of that, and Forest are flying high. So those two players will have the wind in their sails. But our fullbacks are more than capable of keeping them quiet. And by the time Sunday comes around, Lewis Hall might be in the England squad. We're releasing this podcast on Thursday morning. The squad will be released later that day. John, are you expecting Lewis Hall to be in the England squad?
I'm hoping it's England's problem if they don't pick him. It's not ours. And if I'm totally biased for Newcastle United, I would suggest that I would think it doesn't matter because he might get injured with England. Now that's the nervous twitch which come from last season's injuries, etc. The boy deserves recognition, and one of the reasons why I think his future, and bear in mind he's only 20, he should be establishing himself only in the Newcastle United team now, and all of a sudden we're talking about England. And he's only 20 years old, but England's had a left back problem. They haven't had a good left back since Ashley Cole was there, and because Luke Shaw is now virtually permanently injured, he's the Callum Wilson of England, and therefore the left back position's up for grabs. Why he might get in is twofold, apart from the obvious, which is he's in very good form. Lee Carsley knows him from the group, the age groups, etc., has been thinking about him, and where his future might be sort of rubber stamped is because Carsley's only got about a couple of more games before that's the end of his session. Is that Thomas Tuchel, who's taken over, gave Lewis Hall his debut at Chelsea, So he knows all about Lewis Hall and obviously rates him. So that looks good for Lewis Hall. On paper, right now, on current form, there's not a better left back in the country that's English than Lewis Hall.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would disagree with you there. And if he does get that England call up, it'll be thoroughly deserved. Tino might be on the fringes, might probably be in the under 21s, but we expect Nick Pope and Anthony Gordon to have the call up as well. But on Tino, John, it reminded everyone there that you wouldn't have been displeased if Emil Kraft had started against Arsenal. What a performance he put in, and it felt like one of those games that he really, really needed, because you weren't the only one thinking, does he need to be pulled out of the firing line just for a couple of games, maybe, what will a dangerous winger do to him? He didn't look at home at Stamford Bridge a couple of weeks back, etc., etc. It felt like a turning point in his season to not only play as well as he did, but play as well as he did against one of the best wingers in the Premier League.
Absolutely. I mean, he played the way we think of him. I mean, we have, you and I and everybody else, all the fans, have sort of said what a good player this is, and felt that we could, if we had to cash in on any player, we could cash in on Trips because we're in safe hands having Livramento. And that thought has never left me. What slightly disappointed me this season was the irony of the situation, which is whereby I don't think Tino has been until the Arsenal game been as consistent this season as he was last season, and yet this is the season when he's gotten the full England squad, and obviously because of Lee Carsley, who's got great faith in him and had him for the under 21s. But he produced the sort of performance against Arsenal which we identify Tino with. But people have been running off the back of him. He switched off terribly at Chelsea, not home in the league, when the guy ran away and set up their first goal. It can happen to any player, but it can particularly happen to a young player, and there will be that. I mean, heaven forbid, but at some stage there'll be a couple of games, sometime this season, when Lewis Hall's form dips because he's a young man, but back he'll come, and that he'd been out of the side he'd come back in to the side for what should have been a real blinking tough game against Martinelli, who's quick and direct and can cause trouble. And he handled it marvellously. He handled it absolutely marvellously, which was absolutely terrific to see. But what you do now, Tino, is you don't rest on your stand laurels. You get out there and do it again against another winger at Forest. Then you go into the international break as an international, whatever level, under 21 or first team, because you've earned that right. And that is the ability he's got. I've never doubted his ability. I've never doubted what he'll do for this club long term. It was just, is he in a dip? Do you pull him out and then stick him back in? That was a possibility, but he came through it in the best possible way, which was put him back in and let him rely on that ability to get him through.
Yeah, indeed. The centre-back pairing of Fabian Schär and Dan Burn, I mean, I was surprised just how toothless Arsenal were. They were not the Arsenal I expected, not the Arsenal we've come to know, and that made Newcastle's job a lot easier. Of course, Newcastle were brilliant in themselves and aided Arsenal's poor performance. But Sharon Byrne had very, very little to do. And again, they're going to be so more tested on Sunday with Chris Wood. And that's another fascinating battle. I mean, how do they handle Mr. Chris Wood, a man who's just in the form of his career? Everything he seems to touch this season is ended up in the back of the net. It's going to be a fascinating afternoon, isn't it?
Yeah. I think the thing with Shaw and Byrne, because we all know their strengths and we all know their weaknesses. You know, Shaw's terrific on the ball. He comes out, he can ping it about. He's got experience. He uses that experience. Um, Byrne is exceptionally big. He heads everything away. It was the ideal game to play him against Arsenal with hindsight because they're all about set pieces, and you need somebody big and powerful in our penalty area to head the stuff away and help the goalkeeper out. And so it worked. But you know what else worked for them too, in my opinion, Andrew? The midfield setup. Because if there's one thing Shaw and Byrne lack, it is pace. Neither of them are quick. And that is a worry in the modern game because the modern game is played at 100 miles an hour and you've got to be quick. Kelly's quick, the other two aren't quick. But the way our midfield was set up, the three that were picked, um, were terrific for the two centre backs because I felt on one side Joe Willock not only works well with Joe Linton in getting up and back, but he does defensive work. Sean Longstaff is a dirty knees player, which is an expression I've often used. He doesn't mind getting dirty knees. He does the unsophisticated work, but the absolutely crucial work. And both of them, uh, Willock on one side, helped by Joe Linton, and Longstaff on the other, did so much to protect the two fullbacks, the two centre backs, whose lack of pace was not exposed. Now, we've got to make certain it's like that down at Forest, which is why I would go with the same three midfield. I would actually go with the same team that started against Arsenal. But those three in midfield rather than Tonali, who I rate and is going to be a good player. But the balance of those three, if you're going to play those two as your centre backs, and I think he'll keep burning. Of course, Shaw's going to be in, but he'll keep burning. Then you've got to cover the one major piece of frailty, which is the lack of pace. And these two boys in the middle of the park deal with that. Now, whatever Chris Wood might do to Newcastle in terms of his goals, he's not going to run away from those two centre halves because he's not quick himself. But the worry is that other players might run away from them. So you need that shield, particularly in a away game, that the had from the midfield, you need that down at Forest. And that's why I would play an unchanged team without a shadow of a doubt, because you've got to protect Byrne against pace. And I know Chris Wood hasn't got pace. Chris Wood isn't going to run away from him, but others might. And wingers cutting in might, because both flankers have got pace. So you've got to have that midfield protection. In the way the front three set up with the middle three set up with Bruno in the centre of it, give a lot of protection to the lack of pace at the heart of our defence.
Yeah, indeed. And I mentioned this on the Monday show. When you look at the average positions of the midfield three against Arsenal, Bruno and Longstaff were effectively side by side, sitting in just in front of the two centre backs, offering them a little bit more protection. So it'll be interesting to see, given Forest's approach, how Newcastle United again set up. But interestingly, there you've answered the question I was going to ask next. And if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening later on the podcast channel, do get in touch via X at AD Musgrove. I always like to hear your thoughts. If you're on the YouTube channel, get into the comments. John there says unchanged side, which means Bruno, Longstaff, and Joe Willock is the midfield three, which means Sandro Tonali on the bench yet again. For me, John, it was a bit of a surprise to see him on the bench
Oh,
against
I
Arsenal.
was surprised. I've got to be truthful. I was surprised, but I've held my hands up and I've said that Eddie had worked. If Newcastle had lost Eddie, had lost to Arsenal, Eddie would have been pilloried for not starting Tonali. There's absolutely no question about that. But it was the sort of game where Willock's athleticism was crucial, and we needed a dirty knees player like Longstaff because of the way Arsenal play. And I think that Tonali's at his better is a front foot player rather than that defensive shield. And I think with the results Forest are being getting, they'll present some of the problems Arsenal presented, and therefore that something that worked very successfully. It's horses for courses, Andrew. Tonali could easily start the next game, regardless of the result. Nottingham Forest, he could easily start at home to West Ham because that game will suit him better. It's horses for courses. And for this game, something that was tried and trusted and worked against all the odds because our Premier League results have been poor. And then all of a sudden we beat the team that's finished runners up in the Premier League the last 2 seasons. Why would you want to change the team that did that? You found the format. It's a similar type of game. A side on the up and up, a side with confidence, a side with two good wingers, etc., that have got a run of form. Let's go again. And then you can introduce Tonali, who's going to be a very good player for us and a very important player and is a fan favourite. But I think we've got the balance right in midfield, and the byproduct of that was the fact that Byrne and Shaw felt more comfortable instead of getting run. And if we remember, Byrne getting absolutely tortured down at Chelsea in the Premier League. We don't want another, and this is a way, we don't want another situation like that where he's turning with tugboats. And the best way of doing that is the balance we've got in midfield at the moment, with people willing to do the work going backwards, not just going forwards. It helps to protect them too in the centre because make no mistake about it, they lack pace, and that can be brutal in the Premier League. They both lack pace. One lacking pace and one being quick is a different kettle of fish. There's Botman to come. There's Kelly at some stage, horses for courses. But both of those two, we know what to do well. Burns 8'6" and will head all day long. The other guy's clever, but they both lack pace. And if you're going to play them together, you've got to cover that.
Yeah, indeed. And just a reminder that this episode is brought to you by NORD VPN. Thank you to NORD VPN for sponsoring the podcast. And we have a very special offer for your NORD VPN plan. Go to nordvpn.com/tune. And a link will also give you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. There's no risk with NORD's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the podcast episode description box. Please do click on it and help support the podcast. One subscription can be used on up to 10 devices, which is fantastic value for money. It's premium cybersecurity for the price of a cup of coffee per month. And it is the fastest VPN in the world. No buffering, no lagging while streaming. Stops your ISP bandwidth from throttling as well. Loads of other loads of other benefits, but probably the most important is that it keeps your details, like your passwords and your bank details and your online security safe from scammers and hackers. So click that link, get secure, and help support the podcast as well. John, we've mentioned there Chris Wood. We have to mention the other former Newcastle United player tearing it up at Nottingham Forest. It's a little bit, I've actually got something in my eye. I'm not crying about it. It's just a coincidence that suddenly I couldn't see out of my left eye there. But Elliot Anderson, look, he's doing absolutely tremendous down at Forest. And there's, lots of talk about having Newcastle United made a mistake. We know the situation they're in. They had to sell. Elliot Anderson left when he didn't want to, but he understood the importance to Newcastle United of him going. And a lot of people have made the point, John, that actually, had he stayed at Newcastle United, he probably wouldn't have had as many opportunities or minutes that he's getting at Forest. So in many ways, this move was the best move for his career. It wasn't just about Newcastle United. It was about Elliot Anderson getting a pathway to first-team football in the Premier League. But by goodness me, doesn't he look good?
Well, I think he's a quality player. I'm very, very biased because I loved his granddad and still love his granddad, Jeff Allen. He was in the side I reported on that won the first cup in 1969. I've followed Elliot very closely down the Wallsend Boys Club and through the age groups at Newcastle. And make no mistake about it, it decimated him when he had to leave. He is happy as Larry now. It's going great for him. He's picked England as his path to international glory. He's got in the under 21s. He's a regular first teamer. He's shown what he's got. So he's happy as Larry down there. But it killed him at the time because he's a Newcastle United fan. He wanted to do it at Newcastle. It came totally out of the blue from him. He hadn't time to think about it, and he did the deed. And I'm thrilled to bits. I hope, Elliot, if you're listening to this or if Grandad's listening to this, I hope you just, take a deck chair out and have a quiet day on Sunday and enjoy the surrounds and then bang on for the rest of the season because I wish him all the very, very best. And he is a quality player. Yes, he would have probably got less chances here, and he's got more chances there. We're facing three old Newcastle players, of course. We've mentioned Chris Wood, who always go about. We've mentioned Elliot Anderson, but there's Matt Sells in the goal, who was here and was never rated and is just a dot on the horizon of Newcastle's past, but he come back to this country to re-establish his reputation and grow it, and he's done well for them. But of course, the two that played under the current regime and under Eddie is Chris Wood and Elliot Anderson. So it's much more about them. And Chris Wood, has got to be said, is a fascinating story, an absolutely fascinating story because when he was here, I defy anybody to think what has happened since. In 2 seasons here, he scored 4 Premier League goals for Newcastle. 2 in 1 season and 2 in the next. 4 Premier League goals. He didn't score, and at home, when he scored a hat trick against us, that was in one afternoon of an hour and a half. He scored more goals at St James's Park for Forest than he did for us in 2 seasons here. I mean, that was how bad he was. He was an honest plodder here, and I don't mean that nastily because the emphasis is on honest, which he was. He was as honest as the day long, but he was a one-paced plodder. He was that, and he outgrew his time here. He's suddenly gone there, and in this game against us, and wouldn't this be typical? In this game against us, he could equal or beat the Forest club record because he's got 23 Premier League goals for Forest, and that's one behind their record, which Brian Roy's got. So if he scores against us, he's equalled it, and if he scores two against us, he's smashed the record. Now, who would have seen that when he was playing at Newcastle and was one pace, but as honest as the day was long, and tried and did a job that we needed doing immediately to avoid relegation. But it's been quite unbelievable. He's got 9 goals this season, 8 in the league. 9, scored 5 in a row. And I mean, this guy is 33 in a month's time. I mean, it's a winter wonderland for him. He's beyond his autumn, he's in his winter, and he's never scored goals like this in the whole of his career. So there's nothing that's indicated he's going to have a year like this. Now, the question is he just having a year, like a calendar year, which, goes into the end of last season as well as what's happened so far this season? Is he having a calendar year a little bit like the year Miggy had when he scored all the goals for us? And is he going to go back to being what he was before, which is a 5, 6, 8 goal a season man? We don't know. But he's not going to get any fabulous transfer now because he's 33-year-old. This is the height of his career. And why would he want to leave? He's doing well. And again, as I said with Elliot, good luck to him after Sunday. He's a nice boy. But the question remains for me: on Nottingham Forest punching and Chris Wood for that matter, punching against their weight, above their weight, or are they on the rise to become to challenge the established authority at the top of the league? It's early to say they're on the rise because last season they were a relegation side and there's only 10 games this season. but we're going to see what's going to happen, and we might have a better idea after we walk up there on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, certainly so. But you're correct in what you say to Elliot Anderson and Chris Wood. Please be more Alan Shearer than Graham Fenton in that famous Blackburn Rovers game against Newcastle United. But after that, we wish you all the best. The interesting thing about Nottingham Forest and their progress, John, is obviously they suffered that points deduction, and there was a really interesting conversation on BBC Five Live the other night about Nottingham Forest, where the question was posed, essentially, should clubs take the hit? Should they have a 10-point deduction on their season tally if it means the season after, as long as you survive in the Premier League, you've got all these wonderful players, you've been punished, and look what happens. I mean, Eddie Howe was quite clear in the aftermath of the summer. He did not want Newcastle to face a point deduction because of the PSR rules and the accounts. That meant they had to sell Anderson, they had to sell Yakuba Minter. I mean, we could do with Minter now on the right wing, as good as Anthony Gordon's doing. It would still be good to have an out-and-out right winger. If you were the man making the decisions, I mean, do you think it came across Newcastle's table where someone's gone, should we accept 10-point deduction and just deal
I
with
think,
it? I mean, they
I think
hadn't signed the players Forest did, to be fair. Forest went out and really signed the players that you see in the squad now. Newcastle hadn't. So maybe that comes in the way of thinking. But it's an interesting question, isn't it?
it is an interesting question, and in theory, it's a fascinating question. I don't think a club like Newcastle can ever accept a 10-point deduction, because if you do, supposing at the end of the season Newcastle got a 10-point deduction for the start of next season, fans would be up in arms, wouldn't they? They would say, well, that's us scuppered for Europe or whatever before we start kicking a ball, etc. It's a very difficult one. There's not a simple answer to it, Andrew, but there is an obvious answer. Don't get in the position Newcastle United got into, where they've got to sell in a blind panic anybody on the last day to not get that 10 points deduction. They had to sell Elliot Anderson and Minter, and they're looking for an outside right and had one Minter. The Elliot Anderson is looking all the quality we knew he has, but they had to sell him. They were even prepared and might have had to sell Anthony Gordon in. Don't get yourself into that position. You know it's coming. Go off now and sell Trippier, or now and sell Callum Wilson, or now and sell, yes, Harvey Barnes, and bite the bullet if you've got to. But anticipate it. Don't leave it till the last day, have a blind panic and say, we will sell anybody. Just please come and buy one of our players so we don't get 10 points. You can't plan ahead, You know it's coming. Do something about it.
Yeah, no, you're right. You've got to be prepared for these things. And Newcastle United were a little bit caught out, and hopefully they've learned their lessons from it. But on a bigger point, the rules need to be adapted and need to be
Absolutely.
changed. But it is
Absolutely.
great to see Nottingham Forest up there, as long as their form dips for Sunday, and then they can continue their great run. But not at the expense of Newcastle in the Champions League. They can finish just below Newcastle. But just before we get your score prediction, just want to quickly talk about Alexander Isak. 3-3 for him. He's going to go up against Milenkovic, who's been heavily praised for his performances, and then Murillo, who's a really good defender as well, a bit of a ball-playing defender, Brazilian. Look, the 3 goals he scored would have done him a world of good, because he was heavily criticised after the Brighton game. It's going to be a test up against these two, but in a foot race with his touch of the ball, every ability he's got, you would be backing him against these two, even though they've only conceded 7 goals as a whole, as a team. Forest, you would still be backing Isak with the confidence he goes into this game with, the goals behind him. It's going to be another big afternoon for him.
I mean, if you remember, Arsenal's 2 centre halves had a huge reputation as 2 great centre halves, and he took them. And the goal was exquisite, by the way, wasn't it? I mean, the goal was really exquisite. And of course, this argument, and I've always talked to Supermac about it, and I've talked to Steve Watson about it. I mean, before the game on Saturday, and they're saying, why has right-footed players got to play on the left so they can cut in, and left-footed players on the right so they can cut in. Why can't a right-footed player play on the right so he can go wide and get the cross in? And that's exactly what happened with Anthony Gordon, because he got the ball out there and he didn't take an extra touch. He didn't bring it back and try to cut inside and finish. He just whipped it in first time, and there was Isaac. Not a wonderful header of the ball, but not a bad one. A bit like Jackie Milburn. To get a glorious, but it was one touch and get in. And he did that because he's right footed on the right side. I'm not suggesting he's an outside right, he's an outside left. But that was the advantage of having the right footer on the right side. And that's something that people were saying, can Harvey Barnes not do that? So that Gordon can play on the left. Harvey Barnes is all about goals, so he wants to cut in. But I mean, that was a big plus there. And Isaac was playing against two centre halves of Arsenal who had a magnificent reputation. Gabriel and Saliba, a terrific reputation. And it's almost, we're almost like playing a mini Arsenal again, aren't we? We're talking about the two wingers that Arsenal had and the two wingers Forest got. We're talking about Arsenal having two centre backs who have been terrific form this season, and Nottingham Forest having a centre back with the same form. Isaac did the job against Arsenal, and Livramento and Hall did the job against Arsenal. So let the three of them do the job down at Forest. And if they do the same job as they did against Arsenal, those three, we're well on the path to victory.
Okay, well, with that in mind, John, are Newcastle going to get victory on Sunday?
It's a good question, because the way results have gone for Forest, you say this is a huge test, and the question is, are they punching above their weight? Or are they on the way to being something special and establishing themselves? Now, going all the way to being what their greatest side was, which was the Cloughie side that twice won the European Cup, is asking something. That chairman is obviously ambitious. Not only has he bought well in the transfer market, it must be admitted, but going for Edu and getting him away out of Arsenal, etc., and to go to his three clubs is some bold statement for the future. I have still got to be convinced that Forest are anything more than what they are, which is a very, very good mid-table or slightly above side, which is a great step forward from last season. I would like to think they have been on a wonderful run, but the bubble has got to burst at some time. Not permanently burst, but burst like where they get a bad defeat at some time. Because are they good enough? I mean, on the form, they've only lost once this season, and the only other teams that have lost once this season are teams like, I think it's Liverpool and Man City, is it, in the league? And I don't think they're in their class yet, despite the fact they went to Liverpool and won at Liverpool. That was a one-off. I think I've got a sneaking feeling that Forest are about to get a result that's not one of their best, whether that's a draw or a defeat. And I've got a sneaking feeling that Newcastle, after the last couple of games, might well be the team that produces that for them with the right attitude, the right balance, and the right enthusiasm. And I'm going to take, therefore, Newcastle to win.
Well, I hope you're right. And for those watching, you might have seen my face light up with shock when John said Edu to Nottingham Forest, because I totally missed that. And I've just had a little Google and I can't quite believe that's actually happening. You are right. That's some sign of ambition from the Forest owner. But
Oh, it is, yes.
It is, yeah. On the result on Sunday, I've just quickly looked there at the results that Forest have had this season, and we've mentioned they're third and they've only lost once. But if you actually look at who they've played, really, they've not had a huge test other than Liverpool. You could throw Chelsea into that bracket and maybe Brighton at a stretch, but they've had Bournemouth, Southampton, Wolves, Fulham, who they lost to, Crystal Palace, Leicester, and West Ham. So, they've not had a huge test in terms of, the real big guns other than really Liverpool there, because I'm not going to put Chelsea on the same level. So it's going to be interesting. I suppose it all depends where you put Newcastle in the bracket as well. But what they are doing, John, they're beating teams around them in terms of maybe where we put them to finish before the season started. And that's what Newcastle maybe failed to do. So it's a big test for Newcastle to start doing that as well. I'm going to go for a draw. I'm going to play it safe, and I'm going to go for a draw. I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw with the hope that it's a little bit more. But I do think it's going to be a fascinating game on Sunday. I think for once, Sky might have actually picked a good game to put on at 2:00. Someone will now tell me it's not live on Sky. And if it's not, then head over to our live blog where it will certainly be live coverage coming to you. But yeah, I'm going to go for a draw, and we'll see what happens. Thank you, as always, John, for providing the match preview. It's been a pleasure to spend this 45 minutes with you. To you guys watching and listening, it's always a pleasure to bring you the match preview alongside John. Please do sign up to NORD VPN if you have a moment in the funds to do so. It'll offer you that extra protection for your laptop and other devices. Give us a thumbs up on the video, hit like, hit subscribe, leave us a rating and review. And for myself and John, we shall see you next week.